colleagues and friends, welcome back to the Bold by Choice podcast. One of our most powerful recognitions at this year's Bold by Choice Summit was the Arc Changer Award, because changing the arc of education really does require a little bit more than incremental improvement. It requires organizations that are willing to challenge assumptions, rethink systems, persist through many, many obstacles, and help create new possibilities for students and communities over time. And when we thought as a leadership team about organizations naturally that embodied this spirit, the Mind Trust immediately came to mind. For years, the Mind Trust has played a very significant role in shaping educational opportunity in Indianapolis through innovation, talent development, school incubation, leadership investment, and really this deep belief that students deserve access to excellent schools and excellent opportunities. And at the center of this work is our new colleague and friend, Brandon Brown. Brandon, welcome to Bold by Choice.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. It is indeed a pleasure. And I know we're going to have so much fun together today. But before we talk about the Mind Trust and the deep work, I would love to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself as a human and man and leader to our podcast listeners.
Yeah, well, one, it's just so great to be here. Have incredible respect for all the work that you lead on a national scale, and just kind of proving what's possible for a lot of communities across the country. I like many folks in our sector. I started my career as a Teach for America Corps member in St. Louis, Missouri. So I was a 2008 Corps member, taught ninth and 10th grade English at Carnahan High School of the Future, which is now a middle school. But just the most transformative experience of my life. I very quickly realized that my students on the south side of St. Louis had endless potential, were brilliant. Um, and the reality was they lacked a lot of the opportunities that I had growing up. And I'm a very impatient person, and I had these four walls in my classroom. And I quickly realized that, it's not the kids. It's really not the people in the system. It's the system. And, I had 90 minutes, two or three times a week with my students. And we could make a lot of progress, and saw, major increases in their scores on their assessments, and saw a lot of meaningful change. But that change was stifled because it was the system that wasn't created to unlock their endless potential.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
because I'm impatient, I wanted to figure out how can I start to work at a systems level, to
Yeah.
really change the game for kids. I'm originally from Indianapolis, so had the opportunity to get back home to Indy. And one of the most important things that happened while I was in the classroom, I met my wife, who was a middle school math teacher a few miles north of me. So we met actually at Summer Institute for Teach for America in Houston. We started dating like the first week of the school year. Because I'm impatient, we got engaged that November, and then we got married the following June. So it was a whirlwind. And the two of us
Wow.
had the opportunity to move to Indy in 2010. So I worked on Teach for America staff for a few years, had the opportunity to be the charter schools director for the mayor's office. The interesting thing about Indy is that the mayor is the major authorizer. So really got to see the system from, a kind of civic leader perspective. I learned a
Mhm.
lot about how to navigate politics. Had to make some hard decisions around school closures. And then when that mayor chose not to run for re-election, I had the opportunity to join the Mind Trust in 2015, where I led our school incubation work for a few years, and then had the honor to become the CEO of the organization in 2018, a role that I continue to be in today. We have two kids, two boys, a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, who keep my wife and I incredibly busy. I'm a professional chauffeur. I just drive them to all their activities. But it made the work even more real for me because I need to have a high bar for what a quality school is. And one of the components of that is this a school that I would send my kids to?
Yeah.
And that really makes the work personal, and quite frankly, it makes you have to up your game, right? Because if you're launching and supporting schools that you wouldn't send your own children to, then what are we doing? So
Mhm.
yeah, so that's me, and just have the unbelievable privilege to work with lots of smart people at the Mind Trust and a coalition of educators across Indianapolis that are all working towards the same thing.
So, Brandon, I'm curious now, being married and father of two boys, 10 and 12, has they worked on your patience?
Yes and no. I think I have improved my patience somewhat, but the kids also know that there is a limit to that patience. So, it's almost like my classroom management philosophy when I was a teacher, Jim. I was a really fun teacher until I wasn't. And I have, rightly or wrongly taken that same approach to parenting.
Well, I'm the flag football substitute coach tonight, so I'm coaching 8 and 9 year olds. So I'm going to be extremely patient, but high expectations because it's playoff time.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had our final middle school basketball game of the season last night where I'm the coach. And we were undefeated until last night. So it was also an exercise in, me modeling what it looks like to lose to the players
Mhm.
who were not thrilled about losing their first game of the season.
Yeah. Well, we win from winning, or we learn from winning, we learn from losing. And in our world, we never lose. We just fail forward. So
Mhm.
That's right.
it's a data point to get smarter and better and work harder. Um, I had a chance to meet your two boys at the 20th anniversary, and so they're different, right? So as a parent, you want the best schools for your kids, but you might actually even pick different schools knowing your boys are different. How
Yeah.
do you extrapolate that to the world that you work in of choice?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah, I talk a lot about how, I mean, I have two kids who, have the same parents who live in the same household. And yeah, yes, they have similarities, but they're very, very different. And they have very unique interests, right? And they have different ways of navigating the world. And if you extrapolate that out to a city, I mean, that is true for thousands and thousands of kids. And the reality is that there's always been school choice in America, but school choice has been limited to those that have the means to access those choices. And at its core, what we're trying to do in our movement is to ensure that your race or your income or your zip code is not the determinant around where your kids can go to school. And then to
Mhm.
make sure that those choices are quality choices. So I mean, I don't know what we're going to do yet for high school for our boys, but they definitely have different interests.
Mhm.
They have, complementary strengths. And yeah, what's going to work for one is not necessarily going to work for the other. And that's true for all of our kids. And who are we to limit the options that a family has?
That's right.
Amen. All right, I want to go to the Arc Changer. So to set this up for the podcast nation, we were so blessed. Brandon invited us to the 20th anniversary of the Mind Trust. So we were in Indianapolis, what, 12, 1,400 people? Like it was a phenomenal turnout. But what I heard you constantly talk about is we had a North Star. We had a North Star. We had a North Star. We kept unified and working on that for 20 plus years. And yeah, it was a struggle. And yeah, there were some wins and yeah, there were some losses, but we never stopped pursuing the North Star. The following week, we had our Bold by Choice Summit, and we were able to award the Arc Changer Award to the Mind Trust. And it was a proud moment for us, but I want to just give a little context to the audience about the Arc Changer. There's a great quote by Martin Luther King, and he says, "The arc bends towards justice, but it's a long journey." And what we like to say is, yeah, it bends towards justice, but it doesn't bend by itself. That's where we come in. And the Mind Trust has been trying to bend the arc for 20 plus years. and you've done it. You've done some amazing things. And so it was just our pleasure to honor you, the people that came before you, that you've built off, the team you've built. And I say team, I got to witness your organization in action. You don't have a staff, you got a team. It's a beautiful thing, and you're all focused on the North Star. So just talk us through, like, how did you get there? Where are you at? Where are you going?
Yeah, everything you said is right. The movement in Indianapolis for great schools started with the passage of the 2001 charter school law. And what was unique about that law is the mayor of Indianapolis had the ability to authorize. And at the time, we had a mayor that was a Democrat, and he ran on charter schools in his campaign and won, right? So he kind of had, the authority, the kind of, moral support to pursue a policy that obviously was controversial. So, not only did that law pass, but it gave the mayor the ability to authorize, and then he used it, right? So he actually built a charter school office, hired a great team, started launching charter schools that had some early success. And the reality is that they figured out that to scale great schools for all kids, you had to have a broader strategy. You had to have a North Star. You had to create an education ecosystem that would support the growth of great schools. And I think the brilliance in the founding of the Mind Trust, and when the Mind Trust was founded, I was still in college. So, I was in high school when the charter school law passed. I was in college when the Mind Trust was founded. I had nothing to do with this. But the brilliance was that North Star ought to live outside of government. It cannot be contingent upon a single elected official. It cannot erode based on a single election, right? Because obviously our politicians come and go. The winds of electoral politics shift frequently. Though a North Star has to be constant. And for that to happen, it needs to live locally within an institution that has credibility and influence, but is not at the whims of whoever happens to be in office. So that was the brilliance of the Mind Trust. And we were founded in 2006 really as an outgrowth of the mayor's chartering initiative. So in our early years, we were focused on creating this education ecosystem. We worked to recruit national groups to expand to Indianapolis. We've launched 15 new nonprofits over the years. And then in 2011, we put out a report that was very controversial. It called for two things. One is it called for the mayor to be in charge of the school district. That did not go over well. Nobody liked that. And it also called for the creation and the growth of a new type of schools that would have charter-like autonomy, but would live within a school district. That idea stuck. And that kind of shaped the public narrative heading into school board elections, and eventually led to the innovation school model, which was a law that the mayor's office, where I was at the time, worked collaboratively with the Mind Trust and the school district to go to the state house and pass. So that law passed in 2014, which really created the mechanism to scale the growth of high quality charter and charter-like schools to more students in the city by leveraging the resources and the facilities and the scale of a school district for the first time. So for years, it was a zero-sum game. Nobody would sit in the same room, but the innovation school law really created the mechanism to grow high quality schools and to do it collaboratively with the school district. So from 2015 to recently, the exponential growth of high quality charter schools was made possible via that law. But that law was only possible because of the courage that the Mind Trust leadership at the time had to put the idea out there, to widen the Overton window, right? To socialize ideas that might seem crazy and are not going to happen immediately. But over time, if you keep your North Star and keep pushing, those crazy ideas eventually become possible. And that's really been a hallmark of the Mind Trust. Everybody in Indianapolis who knows the Mind Trust know where we stand. It is not a secret. We have been there for 20 years and it hasn't changed. But hopefully over time, we've built credibility, we've built coalitions. We have now mounds of research that show this is moving the needle for kids. And that kind of snowball effect means that, at some point, all of the work to get up the hill, then allows you to move much more quickly. And we're now at a point where we're, co-defining what is the end state, what are we working towards? And I think we're able to build something, very special here. But I think it's because of that North Star, and it's because of the coalitions that have been built over time that have really made that possible.
Yeah.
Brandon, there was so much wisdom in what you just said. Like, Podcast Nation, go back and listen to that 2 or 3 or 4 times. Like, if you want to figure out how to win for kids, there was just a gem of wisdom in that. I want to take you back to something. Um, People look at Indianapolis, the Mine Trust, your state, and think, man, I just wish we had that environment. But the reality is, it wasn't always that way. As the home of the National Charter School Founders Library, we did the oral history of Senator Teresa Lubbers. She ran 6 or 7 years of charter bills before it finally got passed.
Right.
And that was kind of a weird negotiated compromise to trade stuff, right? Which is kind of the story around the country. And yet here you are today, people are like, wow, they've got all of this stuff going on. The mayor, the first mayor in the country to have authorizing authority. People ask us, well, what makes a great authorizer? Is it a university? Is it a state? Is it a district? Is it a mayor? Is it a special purpose? The reality is, it's who takes the bull by the horns and brings in the people and puts the effort in to make it happen. And that's exactly what Bart Peterson did as mayor. He didn't just get the authority, he used it, as you said. And I think that's I want to hammer that home to people. Like, there's all sorts of policy levers out there that people don't use.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes there's bad policy levers and you got to change them. And that's kind of where the Mind Trust comes in. And I call it the relentless pursuit of excellence. But you said everybody knows where you stand.
Mm-hmm.
That's powerful when you have persistence and fortitude and North Star, because you continuously improve stuff. So you've taken some hits personally because you've had to normalize something that people weren't ready for. Can you just give us some insight through that?
Yeah, I think I've learned over time that when you're trying to upend a status quo, there's always going to be opposition to that, right? So what we're trying to do in Indy, and what a lot of advocates are trying to do across country, is to transform a system that has been in place for a long time, that was not created to serve all kids well. And obviously, there are adults that tend to benefit from that system as it is, and see change as an existential threat, to what they would prefer. So I think I've just had to learn over time that if you're not getting any criticism, you're probably not pushing hard enough.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to develop thick skin. So where this, really hit home for me personally was in the 2025 legislative session. We were working with a lot of folks in our coalition to share local property taxes with charter schools. The reality is that if you're a charter school student in Indiana, prior to these reforms, you received $8,000 less than your traditional public school peers. And those schools are producing significantly better results for Black, Latino, and low-income students while receiving $8,000 less a student. And in Indianapolis, within the geography of IPS, almost 62% of public school students attend charter schools. 66% of our Black students, 64% of our low-income students. So the majority of public school students are attending schools that are, currently receiving $8,000 less a kid. That is a moral abomination, right? So if we're just looking at that from, the lens of what's right, that is wrong. And so, we worked really hard over the course of several years with a lot of people, to change the law, to allow local property taxes to follow the kid. So in 2025, we were successful at that. Some money is already being shared. Started in 2028, phasing in through 2031, all local property taxes will be shared with charter school kids. Any new referendum has to be shared on a pro rata basis with charter school kids. So we're a few years away from complete funding parity for kids attending charter schools. One of the first, if not the first state in the country to accomplish that. And there were people during that process that did not believe in what we were doing. And, that resulted in multiple death threats. It resulted in the fact that I couldn't even really go to the state house because I would be, mobbed with lots of angry people. And it certainly affected me personally and, very much negatively impacted my family. We had to upgrade our security system at home. Even today when I go to a public event, I often have to have security. And, this is not like, I want to be very clear, like I'm not a martyr, I'm just one person that's working with a lot of people,
Mhm.
trying to change the game for kids. But I do think it's instructive for advocates in other places around what you have to be willing to give up when you have a bold, unapologetic vision for what's possible. And I don't know of any advocate in the country that has been bold and has led with conviction over time who has not experienced massive opposition. The interesting thing, though, Jim, about that experience for me is one, not all, most of that opposition did not reflect the backgrounds of the kids that we were serving.
Mm.
Just to be really frank, not all, most of that opposition was white folks, who had a very distinct political ideology. Many of them didn't have kids. So if this uproar was from the families that we were serving, then I would have thought twice about what we were doing. That was not where the opposition came from. So ultimately, the supporters of these reforms were oftentimes the very families that we were serving and folks living in the communities who would benefit from these changes. The opposition was from folks who were not directly impacted and did not share the racial and socioeconomic backgrounds of the kids that we were trying to help. So I think that was important for me to understand. We need to be open to feedback. And we need to be humble enough to change our approach when that's what our community wants. But it depends on how you define the community.
Mhm.
If you're defining community with, the 15 loudest voices at a public meeting, then I think that's a narrow definition of community. And our definition of community is broader than that. And it has to include at its core the very families that we're serving. And those families, almost all of them who spoke, were very supportive of what we were pursuing. And that's how we knew that we were on the right side of history.
Yeah.
Vashaunta, what I just heard him is describe bold by choice.
Yeah.
You got to step up. You got to stay true when the going gets tough, and you got to prove it.
Yeah.
And you prove it together. And that's
That's
by
right.
making things work better for kids.
That's right. And we talk all the time about like this is people work. Sometimes it's people work in how do you deal with moments of adversity, as you just so eloquently described, and heart and soul and thoughts out to you and your family even today, because that cannot be easy. And then there's the part you mentioned earlier, building coalitions. Who are the supporters? How do we shape the team? So when you think about the people that you had to work with and navigate from coalition building standpoint, what were some of the strategies you all used or even lessons learned as you kind of rallied the army, so to speak?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I ended up being public enemy number one, but I was one person out of many,
Hmm.
who was leading this effort, and ultimately, like I was fine with, playing that role, because it meant that others, were able to, move much more forcefully at certain times than I was. And, so a couple reflections. One is this was a 6 to 8 year methodical effort, right? Where there was a clear problem, right? Which was a major funding disparity that mostly impacted Black, Latino, and low-income students. And then secondly, there was a policy that was designed to fix that problem, right? And then the coalition was formed, and we had weekly Zoom meetings for years where we were talking about, the nuances of our solution, which legislators to engage when, how we had to, raise money for this effort, who in the community needed to be engaged on the front end, and then particular, how are we going to engage charter school leaders? Because the most effective advocates for school reform are the educators and the families who are in those buildings every single day. It's not always going to be me.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that was really important is that we had developed years of relationships with our school leaders through a lot of other work that meant that we had a foundation of trust. And it meant that when it got really loud and really hard and started to impact them and their jobs, they trusted the coalition around them and they trusted the policy solutions to fix the core problem. And that enabled them, to even fight through a lot of the crazy stuff that they were hearing. And there was one moment that really sticks out at me. And it was before the 2025 legislative sessions, a couple years before, where our school district wanted to go out for a $400 million referendum, and independent charter schools would have gotten $0 from that. And the innovation charter schools, which are actually IPS schools, would have received a fraction of what they deserved, a very small number. And so there was an orchestrated advocacy campaign where school leaders were, leading the charge for about 2 or 3 months that led to public pressure on the district to pull back on the referendum and to not move forward. There was a Saturday morning board meeting where the board was going to vote on whether or not to move forward with the referendum or not. And in our space, about half of the charter schools or innovation schools work very closely with IPS, and about half are not, have no relationship with them. The night before the board meeting, a new proposal was sent to our innovation charter school leaders for full funding parity, one-to-one sharing of this new referendum. The strategy was to divide the charter sector, okay? I called a Zoom meeting that night. I was late to watching a Pacers game because we were on this Zoom meeting. Almost every single school leader showed up.
Mm-hmm.
I was deeply concerned that the sector was going to split and that the innovation schools were going to support this referendum, which would have meant that it would have moved forward, probably would have passed, and all the independent charter school students would have received nothing. And it was an emotional conversation. There were tears.
Yeah.
And the group, not me, the group made the decision to stand together, which meant that all of the innovation school leaders were going to forego almost $2,000 a kid because they were going to stand with all their colleagues who were going to get nothing. The next morning, the school board voted to table the referendum. We then went to the legislature the next session, and the law now says any future referendum has to be shared at full parity. I expect a referendum to be on the ballot in November. Everybody is going to benefit. Every student is going to benefit. And that was only because of the years and years of relational work that led up to a choice where half of our school leaders could have chosen to go with their own self-interest, or they could have chosen to go with the greater good and to stick together. And that was a seminal moment in the 3 years of advocacy that came after that, because the sector went through the crucible, they came out together, and they were unstoppable after that.
All right, Podcast Nation, there was another dose of wisdom. Go back and listen to that one 2 or 3 or 4 times. But I just want to connect a few dots. Brandon, when you introduced yourself, you said, and you lit up talking about being a teacher, that you saw exponential potential in your students. That's what you see in the charter school movement and beyond, because what you're talking about is excellence for all, not just some, right? The second part is the North Star. You said people know who the Mind Trust is and what you stand for. That's where credibility comes from. You did not go to the political winds that kept shifting which is how you build credibility. So when you came to the test, that your team stuck together instead of being divided and conquered, that doesn't happen by overnight. That happens by years and years and years of credible leadership, credible values, and the North Star. And it also comes from humility because people, they don't want to be told what to do. They want to know what their options are, and they want to make the best decisions for their kids, their family, their community. And so many times we see schools pitted against each other, and that you kept them all together, and now it's just going to be schools. How do you perform for kids?
Mm-hmm.
Right? In some ways, that is the North Star we all want, which is bigger than charters.
Mm-hmm. And it's not lost on me, Jim. We think back on the sermon that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave in 1967, 68, can't remember the year. And where that statement comes from, right? His famous quote, "We shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but bends toward justice." And you sharing your story in that level of detail is like nail on the head, bullseye, because you iterated on there were a number of years where this activity and this action, this coalition building, fighting through obstacles, this was not a one and done situation. There are a number of years, number of groups of people who had to make decisions probably every single day, every month to come on that Zoom call, every day in their schools and in their organizations. Every time that you all got together to continue to fight so that that arc could bend toward justice. And in this case, it's making sure that every single student, regardless of whatever you want to fill that blank in with, regardless, is going to be valued at the same level when it comes to their education. And like, I just like am almost getting teary eyed, like hearing the story and how much it took from you all. But at the end of the day, you were able to win for kids.
And also at the end of the day, an organization like the Mind Trust, and an advocate that is not in schools every day actually doesn't have any official power. You have to lead via relationships and influence. And at the end of the day, it's about the educators in the buildings who are doing the actual work for students that is changing their life trajectory. And the minute that an advocate or a nonprofit leader loses sight of that your work needs to be responsive to and supportive of the real work, which is happening in classrooms every day, that's where I think you can get sideways, right? And that's where you can have coalition fractures, and it's where you can lose the trust of all the schools that you're supporting. And I don't think we always get that right? And we get feedback all the time from school leaders. The great thing about charter school leaders is that they're an independent bunch, right? And they think for themselves. So you also got to be open to that feedback, and you have to be willing, to shift over time. Because at the end of the day, the Mind Trust has no official power. We don't write laws. We don't run schools. We don't, really make any of the final decision. We have to work through others. And that's why, again, coming back to the North Star, that's why that North Star is so important. To have something tangible for folks who might have a lot of views on a lot of things to come together on this one issue. And I do think it's not perfect, but that's what Indianapolis has done well, now for over 25 years. And we're now at a point where all students, regardless of school type, are going to be on the same playing field with the same resources, the same accountability system. We'll have a neutral authority that will be managing facilities and transportation for all kids. Property taxes will now be levied by that neutral authority, which will have representation from both charters and the district. And I'll tell you what, this might be a surprise to some people who read news clippings, but I've had more constructive conversations with IPS leadership in the last 3 months than I have in the last 3 years. And I'm super, super optimistic about the future. The next 2 or 3 years, we got to implement this, new system that is kind of the fruition of the North Star. And hopefully, if we do our job right for kids in Indy, it can be a model for cities across the country to look at. And I'm just, humbled and really privileged to work alongside a lot of great people who have been working for a long time to get to this moment.
Well, Brandon, thank you so much for this gift of your story. Thank you for sharing time with us today. This has been a beautiful lesson, I think, to all of us on different strategies that can work in our communities as we think about what our North Stars are and varied approaches that we need to think about and to take as we move forward. And to our listeners, thank you for staying with us and being a part of the Bold by Choice community. If you haven't already, please go ahead and click that subscribe button. Make sure that you stay with us. You get updates when all of our new episodes come out because we know you don't want to miss a beat. As we always say, we are so grateful to you. We'll see you next week. And remember to stay bold.